And first of all, I just want to acknowledge the contributions of everyone here tonight and to assure you that this issue in relation to assessment of needs is a top priority for me as Minister who sits at the Cabinet table with responsibility for disability, and indeed it is a priority for whole of government, as is the National Disability Strategy. As you know, there is a disability unit set up within the Department of An Taoiseach. We have also had a number of Cabinet Committee meetings in relation to disability, and assessment of need is a top priority. And I want to assure you that I have heard and listened to all of your comments here tonight. It is an absolute priority for me to make sure that we have action on this, and I will be certainly open to working with everyone across the House to make sure that we can ensure that children have access to those services that they require. In my last ministry in special education, I travelled the length and breadth of the country, and I heard the lived experience from parents, from teachers, from children themselves who do not have access to speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, and we have put in place now a pilot in relation to special schools, putting therapists in schools and rolling that out to all special schools and beyond. And that is work that is ongoing with government. I want to just, I suppose, make reference to a number of issues that were raised throughout the course of the evening in relation to early intervention. Absolutely critical. If we're to get this right, we're dealing with the issue around the waiting lists for assessment of needs. We have to go right back to the start, those early milestones in a child's life where they're not meeting them, that they get access to those therapies at that level. And that's what's happening as part of our National Disability Strategy. This is our all-of-government blueprint, which we will be publishing over the next few weeks. And that's going to be, as I say, the blueprint over the next few years to make sure that there's an action plan associated with that strategy as well. In relation to the assessment of need, just to go back to the private member's motion here this evening, recruitment and retention. Again, there's a huge amount of work happening at a domestic level, international level, CORU in relation to recognising qualifications of people who are working abroad, who want to come home. These are issues that were raised here this evening. And again, to assure you that we are working hard across government in relation to that. The no wrong door approach. And again, this comes back to parents who want to have access to these services for their children, whether they go into the primary care setting, CDNTs, CAMs, that they are signposted in the right direction and that they're getting access to those services that they need. The issue around the the length of the assessment of needs time was raised. So the average length of an assessment of needs is approximately 30 hours, and it can be up to 90 hours. And what we want to do is make sure that children have access, or adults who are going through an assessment of need, to the therapies they need at the earliest stage possible along that process. I know parents are frustrated, they're angry. I meet them, and I have met them regularly, and in my last brief and this brief as well, and I am absolutely determined that we get this right, but it is complex, and I think many of you have acknowledged that as well, around the complexity of this. It's not just reducing the waiting list, it's not just about recruitment and retention, it's also about looking at where an assessment of need is required, and it often isn't in some of our government departments, in housing, for example, where it is asked for, but it's actually not. You are entitled to get services and housing supports, for example, domiciliary care allowance. You do not need to provide an assessment of needs. So it's a smaller part of the jigsaw, but these are all of the areas that we need to be looking at in relation to getting this right. I also want to acknowledge Cara here today. I've met her previously, and I know how she has been advocating for not only her own family, but families right across the country. And she shouldn't be here today. Absolutely, I concur with people here that she should not be having to, nobody should have to protest outside the gates of Leinster House or a government department to get access to services that they require and that they need. The challenges associated with that assessment of needs process are we need to be looking at, I suppose, a system-wide approach to this. And it does require a proportionate response from government, and one that is real and tangible, and that is clear, and that has positive outcomes for parents, where they actually know the pathway in relation to getting access to services for their children, and we need to spell that out. The motion tonight highlights, I think, some of the aspects of what is a complex issue: the need to increase the availability and access to appropriate services for children with disabilities, the need to ensure that children receive an education appropriate to their needs, and Minister Helen McEntee is doing a lot of work in this area, and we are increasing the number of special classes, therapies in school, and we will continue to do that and to resource it as well. The fact that there is unacceptable delays, as we know, in relation to access to assessment of needs. The data has been set out here many times this evening, around the 15,300 assessment of need applications that are overdue for completion. There's over 10,600 new applications. They were received last year, with 4,100 completed assessments last year. So demand is clearly outstripping capacity within the system, and that's something that we need to absolutely address. The introduction of the targeted waiting list by government last May, that is helping. As I said before, it is helping, but we need to do so much more. With over 3,600 assessments, they were commissioned from private providers between June of last year to the end of March, and we will continue to provide those private assessments and fund that as well as part of the solution. I'm also encouraged by the 30% increase in assessments completed last year compared to 2023. Again, a 65% increase in completed assessments in the first 3 months of this year. So we're moving in the right direction, but we have so much more to do in relation to this. Parents, what do they want? They want early access to services and supports for their children, and in many cases they seek support from primary care, CDNT, CAMS, and they're told then that they're going on to another waiting list. Again, as I said earlier, and I will repeat that, that is not acceptable, and it leads to many people applying for an assessment of need, which is their statutory right set out in the Disability Act. So they may believe that this will give them early or accelerated access to services, but they often find that they're again on a further waiting list after getting their assessment of need. And the issue around legal bills, that parents feel they have to resort to the legal system to ensure that they get their assessment of need. Again, this is not where we want to be. What I want to do as Minister is to make sure that children are getting that early intervention, access to those therapies at a much earlier stage, and it is just signposted, and it just works within the health service in particular. But this is going to require us to address this issue from a number of angles. Our primary focus has to be on the assessment of need process, identifying the delays, what are the blockages that are causing these long waiting lists, and then we need to find the most effective solution to these blockages. And it may require legislative changes while preserving the statutory right to an assessment of need. It will also require operational changes, increased staffing resources, better IT systems, or outsourcing to the private sector where appropriate. And that work it's already underway, in fact, with officials from the Department of Children and the HSE, and that's set out in the roadmap for service improvement. We also have to ensure that any changes introduced, that they are effective and that they can be sustained over time. There's no point in alleviating this current waiting list and then having another backlog appear again. We need to actually look at the system and make sure that we can reform it sustainably into the future. We are all aware of the many demands within the healthcare system, but we also have to ensure that our disability services are appropriately and adequately resourced and staffed to meet the needs of people with disabilities in Ireland. And in that regard, I look forward to the development of that dedicated disability workforce strategy this year, and that will meet the growing service demands and address recruitment and retention challenges across specialist disability services. And it's also important to emphasise that increased capacity and enhanced service delivery in the disability sector will not be possible unless we as a government ensure that we are resourcing it properly, and that we are ambitious about that resourcing. So, as you know, we are spending €3.2 billion in our HSE disability services this year. That's an 11.5% increase in funding on last year, or 1.2 billion since 2020. So this is significant funding, and I do appreciate that there are significant pressures. People talked about the incidences as well of those saying that they have a disability. We know people are ageing, we're all living longer, and disability will be part of what we'll have to deal with in this House. Thank you.